You constantly seek approval from others before making important decisions, waiting for permission to pursue your true calling. Every day you compromise your authentic path because you fear walking alone, while watching others live boldly on their own terms and achieve the success that eludes you. I am Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman who walked the warrior's path in complete solitude, winning over 60 duels and mastering the way of strategy through relentless self-reliance. What I discovered about walking the path alone will transform how you approach your personal journey, giving you the inner strength to forge your own way regardless of others' opinions or support. The same principles that made me undefeatable in single combat can make you unstoppable in pursuing your purpose. Whether you're building a business, developing mastery, or creating the life you truly want. But first, like this video, subscribe for more warrior wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to embrace the solitary path to greatness. I still remember the weight of my father's broken sword in my hands, the morning I decided to leave everything behind. It was more than steel and wood, it was the symbol of a life already chosen for me, a path carved by others' expectations and traditions that felt like a prison closing around my spirit. I was barely 16 when I made the choice that would define my entire existence. My clan had plans for me, safe plans, conventional plans. They wanted me to follow the well-worn path of my ancestors, to take my place in their structured world where every move was predetermined, every decision filtered through committee, every dream subjected to approval by men who had never dared to dream themselves. But as I held that broken weapon, I felt something break inside me, not in defeat, but in liberation. I realized that this sword, damaged and discarded, represented everything I refused to become. I would not be a broken version of someone else's vision for my life. The fear was overwhelming. I had never spent a single night away from my family's compound, never made a decision without consulting my elders, never faced the world without the safety net of clan support. The thought of walking out into the unknown with nothing but my own judgment to guide me terrified me more than any opponent I would later face in combat. Yet beneath that fear, I felt something else stirring, a fierce hunger for authenticity that had been starving in the comfortable cage of others' expectations. I knew that if I stayed, if I accepted the easy path they offered, I would spend my entire life wondering what I might have become if I had been brave enough to find out who I really was. That morning, I packed only the essentials, a simple sword, basic traveling clothes, and those worn straw sandals that would carry me into my destiny. I left behind comfort, security, status, and the approval of everyone I had ever known. I left behind my father's broken sword and the broken dreams that came with it. The moment I stepped beyond the gates of my clan's territory, I felt the full weight of my choice. There was no one to catch me if I fell, no one to blame if I failed, no one to seek permission from for my next move. For the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly alone. And in that terrifying, exhilarating moment, I began to understand what it truly meant to be free. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and filled with challenges I couldn't even imagine. But it was mine, and mine alone to walk. The first night alone on the mountain road, I sat by a dying fire with only a single rice bowl between me and starvation. That simple wooden vessel became my teacher in ways no master ever could. It held exactly enough rice for one person, no more, no less. There was no one to share it with, no one to prepare it for me, no one to ensure I would eat tomorrow. The loneliness hit me like a physical blow, not the gentle solitude of an afternoon walk, but the crushing weight of complete isolation. Every sound in the darkness made me realize how vulnerable I was. Every shadow reminded me that I had no allies, no backup, no safety net. The silence was so complete it seemed to roar in my ears. I had grown up surrounded by people servants, fellow students, family members who anticipated my needs before I even recognized them myself. Now, as I sat in that flickering firelight, I understood the difference between being alone by choice and being truly abandoned. I had chosen this path, which made the loneliness both more bearable and more terrifying, but something remarkable happened in those first weeks of solitude. The constant chatter in my mind, the voices of others telling me what to think, how to act, what to want, began to quiet. Without the endless input of other people's opinions and expectations, I started to hear something I had never noticed before. My own authentic voice. The loneliness that had initially felt like punishment slowly transformed into the most powerful teacher I had ever encountered. Each meal I prepared myself taught me self-reliance. Each night I survived alone built confidence in my ability to endure. Each problem I solved without consulting anyone else strengthened the muscle of independent thinking. I learned to find companionship in my own thoughts, comfort in my own presence. The conversations I had with myself became more honest and insightful than any I had shared with others. Without the need to perform or please anyone else, I could finally be completely truthful about my fears, my ambitions, my weaknesses, and my potential. There were moments when the loneliness nearly broke me, nights when I would have given anything for just one familiar face, one voice from home. I would stare at that single rice bowl and wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. The temptation to turn back, to return to the comfortable prison of others' expectations, was overwhelming, but each time I pushed through that darkness, I emerged stronger. The loneliness was forging something unbreakable inside me, a core of self-reliance that no external circumstance could shake. I was learning that the person who can be content in his own company, who can find strength in solitude rather than weakness, possesses a power that crowds can never provide. That simple rice bowl taught me the most profound lesson of my journey. You must learn to be your own best companion before you can offer anything of value to others. The bloodstain on my sleeve from that first real duel taught me a lesson worth more than all the advice I had ever received. I was barely 17 when I faced Arimaki, a renowned swordsman with years of experience and a reputation that made grown warriors tremble. Everyone who knew about the challenge told me I was walking to my death. The night before the duel, an old monk approached me with well-meaning counsel. "Strike high and retreat quickly," he whispered urgently. "Use the Nitin technique your father favored. Trust in the ancestors' wisdom." A traveling merchant overheard and offered his own strategy. Fight defensively. Let him tire himself out. Patience wins over aggression. Standing there, listening to their contradictory advice, I felt something dangerous happening to my confidence. Their words, meant to help, were actually poisoning my mind with doubt. Each suggestion pulled me away from my own instincts, my own understanding of combat, my own assessment of my opponent's strengths and weaknesses. That's when I realized the most crucial truth of the warrior's path. No one else can fight your battles for you, so no one else can truly know how to win them. Every piece of advice, no matter how well-intentioned, comes filtered through someone else's fears, limitations, and experiences. What worked for them in their situation might be exactly the wrong approach for you in yours. The morning of the duel, I made a decision that would guide me for the rest of my life. I stopped listening to everyone else and started listening only to myself. I studied my opponent with my own eyes, assessed his stance with my own understanding, and trusted my own instincts about timing and strategy. When the battle began, Ari moved exactly as I had predicted, not because anyone had told me what to expect, but because I had learned to read the subtle signs that revealed his intentions. While he struck where my advisors had said he would attack, I was already somewhere else, moving according to my own plan. The moment my sword found its mark and his blood stained my sleeve, I understood that this victory belonged entirely to me, not to my teachers, not to my advisors, not to ancient techniques or borrowed wisdom. This was the fruit of trusting my own judgment completely, even when it contradicted everything others believed I should do. From that day forward, I made a vow that saved my life countless times. I would listen to others' perspectives, but never let them override my own assessment. I would gather information, but always filter it through my own understanding. I would respect experience, but never substitute it for my own direct perception of reality. This doesn't mean I became arrogant or close-minded. Instead, I became more discerning. I learned to distinguish between useful information and mental interference. I developed the ability to absorb what served my purpose while remaining unshaken by what didn't align with my own deeper knowing. That blood-stained sleeve became a reminder that the most reliable counsel you'll ever receive comes from the voice inside you that emerges only when you stop listening to everyone else. There is a particular stone overlooking the valley near Kumamoto where I made some of the most difficult decisions of my life. Smooth from centuries of wind and rain, it became my throne of solitude where I learned to carry the full weight of my choices without flinching or seeking someone else to blame when things went wrong. I remember sitting on that stone after receiving news that my former teacher had died in a battle I had chosen not to join. The guilt was crushing. Had I stayed with my clan, had I followed the conventional path, perhaps I could have saved him. The temptation to blame my decision to walk alone was overwhelming. It would have been so easy to condemn my choice and use his death as proof that my solitary path was selfish and wrong. But as I sat there in the mountain silence, I realized that this was exactly the test that separates those who can truly walk alone from those who merely think they can. The weight of my decisions, all of them, the good and the bad, belonged to me alone. I could not claim credit for my victories, while deflecting responsibility for my failures. Every choice creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can predict or control. When you choose to walk your own path, you must accept that some of those ripples will cause pain to yourself and sometimes to others. The alternative is to let others make your choices for you, which means living a life that isn't truly yours and facing a different kind of regret that lasts forever. On that stone, I made a commitment that would define my character for the rest of my days. I would own every consequence of every decision, without excuse, without blame, without wishing I could change the past. This wasn't about being harsh with myself or carrying unnecessary guilt. It was about developing the inner strength that comes from taking complete responsibility for your life. Most people avoid making difficult decisions because they fear the weight of the consequences. They seek committees, consultants, and consensus because shared responsibility feels lighter. But what they don't realize is that avoiding decisive action is itself a decision, usually the worst one possible. When you truly accept that you alone are responsible for your choices, something remarkable happens. You become incredibly careful and thoughtful about those choices. You stop making impulsive decisions based on emotion or pressure from others. You develop the patience to consider consequences thoroughly before acting. You become someone whose word means something because you understand the weight that words carry. The stone taught me that freedom and responsibility are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. The price of making your own choices is accepting the full weight of those choices. The reward is a life that belongs completely to you, with victories that are genuinely yours and mistakes that become genuine wisdom. I still visit stones like that one when I face major decisions, not to seek answers from the universe, but to remind myself that whatever I choose, I will own completely. That knowledge makes me stronger, more careful, and ultimately more free than any person who shares the burden of their choices with others. I carved my first compass from bamboo and magnetized iron during a winter trapped in the mountains. but it taught me something far more valuable than navigation. As I watched that simple needle consistently point north, regardless of storms, distractions, or my own desires for it to point elsewhere, I understood what I needed to develop within myself, an inner compass that would always point toward my true purpose. No matter what external forces tried to pull me off course, most people live their entire lives without ever developing this internal guidance system. They mistake the voices of parents, teachers, society, and peers for their own authentic voice. They confuse temporary emotions with lasting truth. They follow trends instead of principles, reactions instead of responses, and other people's definitions of success instead of their own. During my years of solitary wandering, I developed a daily practice that became more valuable than any sword technique. I would sit in complete silence for an hour each morning, not to meditate or pray, but simply to listen. Not to the world around me, but to the voice within me that emerged only when all other voices quieted. In those early days, the noise in my head was overwhelming. I heard my father's expectations, my teacher's warnings, society's judgments, and my own fears all competing for attention. But gradually, beneath all that mental chatter, I began to distinguish a different voice, quieter but more consistent, gentler but more reliable, less dramatic but infinitely more trustworthy. This voice never told me what I wanted to hear. It told me what I needed to know. When I was considering taking an easy path, it reminded me of my commitment to growth. When I was tempted by the approval of others, it pointed me back toward my authentic purpose. When fear tried to disguise itself as wisdom, this inner compass helped me recognize the difference. Learning to distinguish between your authentic inner voice and the programming you've absorbed from others is perhaps the most crucial skill for anyone who wants to walk their own path. Your authentic voice has certain characteristics. It's consistent over time. It aligns with your deepest values. It often requires courage to follow, and it leads toward growth rather than comfort. The programmed voices, by contrast, are reactive, change with circumstances, seek safety over truth, and often contradict each other. They sound urgent and emotional, while your authentic voice tends to be calm and persistent. They promise easy solutions, while your inner compass usually points toward the path that will make you stronger. I tested this inner guidance in countless situations, from choosing which battles to fight to deciding where to travel next. Every time I followed my inner compass, even when it led me toward difficulty or uncertainty, I emerged stronger and more aligned with my true purpose. Every time I ignored it in favor of easier options or others' expectations, I found myself further from the person I was meant to become. The most remarkable thing about developing this inner compass is that it becomes more accurate the more you use it. Like any skill, it strengthens with practice. The more you learn to distinguish your authentic voice from all the other noise, the clearer and more reliable that voice becomes. Your inner compass already exists within you. It has been pointing toward your true north your entire life. The question is whether you've learned to read it clearly, or whether you're still letting other people's maps determine your direction. In a ruined temple high in the mountains, I discovered a bell that had lost its voice, cracked down one side, so that no matter how hard you struck it, it produced only silence. The monks had abandoned this place years before, but I stayed for 3 months, and that silent bell became one of my most profound teachers. At first, the silence around me was maddening. I had grown accustomed to the constant noise of human activity, conversations, arguments, advice, questions, explanations. Without this verbal chaos, I felt naked, exposed, almost panicked. My mind kept reaching for distractions, for voices, to fill the void, for anything to break the overwhelming quiet. But gradually, I began to understand what that silent bell was teaching me. In a world obsessed with speaking, with sharing every thought and reaction immediately. True power often comes from the ability to remain quiet and listen, not just to others, but to the deeper currents of truth that emerge only in silence. I developed what I came to call silent walks, journeys through the mountains where I would travel for days without speaking a single word, even to myself. These walks taught me that most of what we think we need to say is actually mental noise that obscures rather than clarifies our understanding. In silence, I learned to process experiences more deeply. Instead of immediately sharing my thoughts about a beautiful sunset or a challenging encounter, I would let these experiences settle into my consciousness without the filter of words. This deeper processing revealed layers of meaning that surface-level conversation never could access. Silence also taught me the difference between reacting and responding. When someone spoke to me after weeks of quiet, I found myself naturally pausing before answering, considering not just what to say, but whether anything needed to be said at all. This pause, this space between stimulus and response, became my source of tremendous power in both conversation and combat. The silent bell showed me that sometimes the most profound communication happens without words. In battle, I learned to read my opponents through subtle shifts in breathing, micro-expressions, changes in stance or information that would be lost if I were focused on verbal analysis or internal commentary. Most importantly, silence revealed the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the feeling that something is missing. Solitude is the recognition that you are complete unto yourself. In the complete quiet of those mountain months, I discovered that I was excellent company for myself when I stopped trying to fill every moment with mental chatter. The practice of deliberate silence became a cornerstone of my strength. Before making important decisions, I would retreat into quiet contemplation. Before entering battle, I would find a moment of complete stillness. Before speaking on matters of consequence, I would ensure that my words emerged from genuine understanding, rather than mere reaction. That cracked bell taught me that sometimes the most powerful sound is no sound at all. In a world where everyone is desperate to be heard, the person who has mastered silence possesses a rare and formidable advantage. In the depths of my third winter alone, I began keeping what I called my nightmare scroll, a brutally honest record of every fear, doubt, and dark impulse that emerged when there was no one around to help me pretend I was stronger than I actually was. Writing down these demons was the first step in a battle more fierce than any I had ever fought with sword and steel. The external enemies I faced in duels were straightforward, skilled warriors with clear intentions and visible weapons. But the internal enemies that emerged in solitude were far more cunning and dangerous. They knew exactly which thoughts would paralyze me, which memories would shame me, which doubts would make me question everything I had sacrificed to walk this path. My greatest demon was the voice that whispered I was a fraud, that my victories were luck, that my philosophy was pretension, that I was just a scared boy playing at being a warrior. This voice grew louder in the lonely hours before dawn, when the weight of my choices pressed down like stones on my chest. It would catalogue every mistake I had made, every person I had disappointed, every moment of weakness I had experienced. Another demon took the form of crushing regret. It would show me vivid images of the comfortable life I had abandoned, the relationships I had sacrificed, the security I had rejected. It painted pictures of my former classmates, now safe and successful, while I shivered alone in mountain caves, surviving on whatever food I could find or earn. The most insidious demon was the one that offered reasonable compromises. You don't have to give up completely. Just return for a while. Just seek some help. Just find a teacher or companion to share the burden. This voice was particularly dangerous because it sounded so rational, so sensible, so caring about my well-being. But fighting these demons alone taught me something that no external victory ever could. The difference between temporary courage, borrowed from others, and permanent courage forged in solitary struggle. When you face your darkest fears with no one to reassure you, no one to distract you, no one to save you from yourself, you develop an unshakable core that becomes your greatest strength. I learned to interrogate each fear. Was it based on truth or imagination? Was it warning me of genuine danger, or simply trying to pull me back to familiar territory? Was it protecting me from real harm, or preventing me from necessary growth? Most fears, I discovered, were paper tigers that dissolved under direct examination. The process was brutal. There were nights when I wept from exhaustion, days when I wanted to abandon everything and return to the safety of others' expectations. But each time I pushed through the darkness and emerged on the other side, I found that I had claimed back a piece of myself that fear had been holding hostage. The nightmare scroll taught me that your demons lose their power when you stop running from them and start studying them. When you can look directly at your worst fears and worst impulses without flinching, you develop a kind of invincibility that no external circumstance can shake. By the end of that winter, my scroll had transformed from a record of terrors into a map of conquered territory. Each fear I had faced and overcome became a source of strength rather than weakness. I learned that the only way to truly defeat your demons is to face them alone, in complete honesty, without the comfort of others, reassurance, or the distraction of easier battles. I carved my daily training schedule into a piece of hardwood that I carried with me for over a decade. Every morning before dawn, every evening after sunset, every detail of practice was recorded there, not as punishment, but as promise to the only person whose opinion truly mattered, myself. This simple piece of carved wood taught me that self-discipline becomes almost effortless when you answer only to your own highest standards. When you live among others, discipline often becomes a performance. You exercise because people are watching. You study because teachers are testing. You practice because others expect it. But this external motivation creates a fragile foundation that crumbles the moment no one is looking. True discipline emerges only when you maintain your standards in complete solitude, when the only witness to your effort is your own conscience. My daily routine was relentless by most people's standards. Sword practice at dawn, physical conditioning, study of strategy, meditation, more combat training, evening reflection. But it never felt like a burden because I had designed it myself for my own purposes, according to my own understanding of what I needed to become the warrior I envisioned. The key to sustainable self-discipline is understanding that it's not about forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about becoming so clear on who you want to be that the actions necessary to become that person feel natural, even inevitable. When you truly want something not because others expect it, but because it aligns with your deepest purpose, discipline transforms from external pressure into internal momentum. I learned to view each day's training not as a series of tasks to complete, but as opportunities to honor my commitment to myself. Every swing of the sword was a vote for the person I was becoming. Every moment of discomfort was an investment in future strength. Every repetition was a conversation with my potential. The solitary nature of my discipline made it pure. There was no one to impress with how hard I was working, no one to make excuses to when I fell short, no one to blame for my lack of progress. This created a feedback loop of absolute honesty. Either I was doing what I said I would do, or I wasn't. Either I was becoming stronger, or I was becoming weaker. There was no middle ground and no audience to fool. I discovered that group accountability often becomes an excuse for mediocrity. When everyone agrees to lower standards together, when the group settles for good enough, when collective comfort becomes more important than individual excellence, discipline dies a slow death. But when you answer only to yourself, your standards can be as high as your dreams. The wooden schedule also taught me The relationship between self-discipline and self-respect. Every time I kept a promise to myself, my confidence in my own word grew stronger. Every time I followed through on my commitments, my trust in my own character deepened. The discipline wasn't just making me a better warrior, was making me a person worthy of my own respect. That carved wood became weathered and smooth from years of handling, but the principles it represented became the unshakable foundation of everything I accomplished. When you learn to be disciplined in solitude, you develop a kind of inner authority that no external circumstance can undermine. I carved my daily training schedule into a piece of hardwood that I carried with me for over a decade. Every morning before dawn, every evening after sunset, every detail of practice was recorded there not as punishment, but as promise to the only person whose opinion truly mattered, myself. This simple piece of carved wood taught me that self-discipline becomes almost effortless when you answer only to your own highest standards. When you live among others, discipline often becomes a performance. You exercise because people are watching. You study because teachers are testing. You practice because others expect it. But this external motivation creates a fragile foundation that crumbles the moment no one is looking. True discipline emerges only when you maintain your standards in complete solitude, when the only witness to your effort is your own conscience. My daily routine was relentless by most people's standards. Sword practice at dawn, physical conditioning, study of strategy, meditation, more combat training, evening reflection. But it never felt like a burden because I had designed it myself for my own purposes, according to my own understanding of what I needed to become the warrior I envisioned. The key to sustainable self-discipline is understanding that it's not about forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about becoming so clear on who you want to be that the actions necessary to become that person feel natural, even inevitable. When you truly want something, not because others expect it, but because it aligns with your deepest purpose, discipline transforms from external pressure into internal momentum. I learned to view each day's training not as a series of tasks to complete, but as opportunities to honor my commitment to myself. Every swing of the sword was a vote for the person I was becoming. Every moment of discomfort was an investment in future strength. Every repetition was a conversation with my potential. The solitary nature of my discipline made it pure. There was no one to impress with how hard I was working, no one to make excuses to when I fell short, no one to blame for my lack of progress. This created a feedback loop of absolute honesty. Either I was doing what I said I would do, or I wasn't. Either I was becoming stronger, or I was becoming weaker. There was no middle ground and no audience to fool. I discovered that group accountability often becomes an excuse for mediocrity. When everyone agrees to lower standards together, when the group settles for good enough, when collective comfort becomes more important than individual excellence, discipline dies a slow death. But when you answer only to yourself, your standards can be as high as your dreams. The wooden schedule also taught me the relationship between self-discipline and self-respect. Every time I kept a promise to myself, my confidence in my own word grew stronger. Every time I followed through on my commitments, my trust in my own character deepened. The discipline wasn't just making me a better warrior, it was making me a person worthy of my own respect. That carved wood became weathered and smooth from years of handling, but the principles it represented became the unshakable foundation of everything I accomplished. When you learn to be disciplined in solitude, you develop a kind of inner authority that no external circumstance can undermine. The diagram I sketched of my two-sword fighting technique represents more than just an innovative combat method. Evidence of what becomes possible when you have the courage to abandon conventional wisdom and develop your own approach. Every line on that worn paper challenged centuries of established sword-fighting doctrine. and it could only have been created in the complete freedom of solitary experimentation. Traditional sword schools taught that fighting with two swords was ineffective, impractical, and disrespectful to the art. Every master I had encountered used a single blade and insisted this was the only proper way. When I began experimenting with dual weapons during my months alone in the mountains, I was violating not just technique but tradition itself. The pressure to conform to established methods is overwhelming when you're surrounded by others. Fellow students mock innovation, teachers discourage deviation, and the entire community reinforces the message that the old ways are the only correct ways. But in solitude, these voices of conformity lose their power. Without anyone to judge my experiments or shame me for questioning accepted wisdom, I was free to explore possibilities that others couldn't even imagine. My two-sword technique developed through hundreds of private sessions where I could fail spectacularly without embarrassment. I experimented with grip variations that looked foolish, tried combinations that seemed impossible, and pursued ideas that conventional wisdom declared insane. Most of these experiments led nowhere, but some revealed entirely new dimensions of combat effectiveness. The breakthrough came during a fierce winter storm when I was practicing alone in a mountain clearing. Frustrated with my limitations using a single sword against multiple imaginary opponents, I instinctively drew my short sword with my left hand. The movement felt natural, as if my body had been waiting years for permission to use both hands as independent weapons rather than forcing one to merely support the other. What emerged from that moment of spontaneous innovation was a fighting style that gave me advantages no traditionally trained warrior could match. I could attack and defend simultaneously, create confusing rhythms that disrupted opponents' timing, and adapt to situations that would overwhelm a single sword fighter. But more importantly, I had proven to myself that innovation is possible when you're willing to stand alone against conventional wisdom. The courage to be different extends far beyond sword fighting techniques. It's about recognizing that following the crowd guarantees you'll never exceed the crowd's limitations. Every significant advancement in human knowledge, skill, or understanding has come from individuals willing to experiment beyond the boundaries of accepted practice. Being different requires tremendous inner strength because it often means being criticized, ridiculed, or rejected by those who find comfort in conformity. When I first demonstrated my two-sword technique in public, established masters called it crude. Students laughed at its unconventional appearance, and critics predicted it would fail against real opponents. But the validation came through results, not approval. When my innovative technique proved superior in actual combat, when victories mounted and opponents fell to methods they couldn't understand or counter, the criticism transformed into grudging respect and eventually into imitation. The diagram became a symbol of something larger than fighting technique. It represented the principle that excellence often requires the courage to walk away from what everyone else is doing and create something entirely new. Innovation is the natural result of solitary experimentation combined with the willingness to be misunderstood until your results speak for themselves. The leather-bound journal where I recorded each victory became more than a historical record. It was the foundation of an unshakable confidence built on actual achievement rather than empty praise or borrowed belief. Every entry represented a moment when I trusted my own abilities completely, when my self-reliance translated into real-world success that no one could dismiss or diminish. True confidence cannot be given to you by others, no matter how many encouraging words they offer. It cannot be borrowed from motivational speeches or inherited from family reputation. It can only be earned through your own actions, proven through your own results, and built through the accumulation of personal victories that belong entirely to you. The difference between authentic confidence and mere arrogance is that confidence is based on competence. Every duel I won, every technique I mastered, Every challenge I overcame added another layer to the foundation of genuine self-assurance. When you know you can rely on yourself because you've done it repeatedly under pressure, you develop a quiet certainty that external circumstances cannot shake. I learned to distinguish between confidence and the desperate need for validation that drives so many people's behavior. Those who constantly seek approval from others are actually revealing their own inner uncertainty. They need external confirmation because they don't trust their own assessment of their worth or abilities. But when you've proven your capabilities to yourself through solitary effort and personal achievement, you become independent of others' opinions. My journal also revealed patterns that shallow confidence would have missed. I noticed that my victories came not from overwhelming natural talent, but from thorough preparation, careful observation, and the willingness to trust my own judgment even when it contradicted conventional wisdom. This understanding made my confidence sustainable rather than fragile. The confidence built through solitary achievement has a different quality than confidence built through group validation. It's quieter but more solid, less dramatic but more reliable. It doesn't need to announce itself or seek recognition because it's based on inner knowledge rather than external reputation. I remember one particular entry from a duel where I faced an opponent whose reputation far exceeded my own. Everyone present expected me to lose, and their doubt was almost tangible. But as I read through previous entries in my journal before the fight, I was reminded of dozens of times when I had overcome seemingly impossible odds through preparation, focus, and trust in my own abilities. That reminder gave me the internal anchor I needed. While my opponent fought for his reputation and the crowd's approval, I fought from a place of proven competence and self-knowledge. The victory that followed wasn't lucky or accidental. It was the natural result of confidence built on a foundation of actual capability. The journal taught me that genuine confidence is not about never feeling doubt or fear. It's about knowing that you have the ability to work through those feelings and perform effectively despite them. It's about trusting your preparation, your judgment, and your capacity to adapt when circumstances change. Years later, when I no longer needed to prove myself to anyone else, I still maintained that journal, not for others to read, but as a reminder of what becomes possible when you build confidence through competence rather than seeking it through others' approval. The scroll containing my personal principles, written in my own hand during a winter of deep contemplation, became the philosophical foundation that guided 30 years of solitary mastery. These weren't borrowed concepts from ancient texts or popular teachings. They were hard-won insights extracted from direct experience of what it truly means to be self-reliant in every aspect of existence. The first principle I wrote was this: dependence on others for approval, direction, or support creates weakness in character that no external strength can overcome. I had learned through painful experience that every time I sought validation from others, I surrendered a piece of my own power. Every time I waited for permission to act, I weakened my ability to trust my own judgment. Every time I relied on others to solve my problems, I diminished my own problem-solving capacity. Self-reliance is not about isolation or refusing all help. It's about maintaining your core strength and identity regardless of external circumstances. It means you can accept assistance when appropriate without becoming dependent on it. You can value others' input without being controlled by their opinions. You can enjoy company without being weakened by solitude. The philosophy of self-reliance begins with taking complete responsibility for your own life, your own decisions, and your own results. This isn't about blame or harsh self-judgment, about recognizing that you are the primary force in determining your own destiny. When you truly internalize this truth, you stop wasting energy on things you cannot control and focus entirely on things you can influence. I wrote, "The person who needs others to feel complete will always be at the mercy of others' availability, mood, and agenda. Too many people build their entire sense of self around relationships, roles, or external circumstances that can disappear without warning. But when your foundation is internal, built on your own character, capabilities, and principles, you become stable regardless of what changes around you. Another principle that guided my path: help others without expecting appreciation, and never help in a way that creates dependence. True strength enables you to lift others up, but false helping that makes people weaker rather than stronger serves no one. I learned to share my knowledge and skills in ways that increased others' self-reliance rather than their dependence on me. The most challenging principle was this: your worth is not determined by others' recognition of your achievements. Living this principle required me to find satisfaction in the work itself rather than in praise for the work. It meant pursuing excellence for its own sake rather than for the rewards excellence might bring. It demanded that I become someone whose opinion of myself was not negotiable based on external feedback. Self-reliance also meant developing what I called philosophical independence, the ability to think for myself rather than simply adopting popular beliefs or following intellectual fashion. I questioned everything, tested ideas through personal experience, and kept only what proved useful and true in my own life. The philosophy that emerged from these principles was simple but demanding: become so complete in yourself that you need nothing from others to feel whole, capable, or worthy. This doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming so strong and centered that you can engage with others from a position of abundance rather than need. This philosophical foundation made every other aspect of my development possible. When you're not dependent on others for your sense of identity, direction, or worth, you become free to pursue your highest potential without compromise or distraction. The bundle of letters from my clan, tied with silk cord and yellowed with age, represents every attempt the world made to pull me back from my solitary path. Each letter was carefully crafted to exploit a different weakness: guilt, fear, loneliness. Duty A's if my family and former teachers had conducted a strategic campaign to recapture what they saw as a lost soul. The early letters focused on duty and obligation. Your clan needs you. Your family depends on you. You have responsibilities that These messages were designed to make me feel selfish for pursuing my own path, as if following my authentic calling was somehow a betrayal of everyone who had invested in my conventional future. Later letters shifted to fear tactics. The world is dangerous for someone alone. You're throwing away security for foolish dreams. What will happen when you're old and have no one to care for you? These messages revealed how threatened others become when someone demonstrates that they're safe. Conventional choices are not the only options available. The most sophisticated letters appealed to my potential regrets. Think of all you're missing. Your old friends are achieving great things. There are opportunities here that won't wait forever. You're wasting your talents. In isolation, these messages were particularly insidious because they contained enough truth to be emotionally compelling while missing the larger truth of what I was gaining through my solitary journey. What I learned from these persistent attempts to reclaim me is that people fear those who walk their own path because such people represent a living challenge to everyone else's compromises. When you demonstrate that it's possible to live according to your own principles rather than others' expectations, you make everyone around you question their own choices. The resistance I faced wasn't really about concern for my well-being. It was about protecting others' belief systems. If I could succeed by walking alone, it meant their dependence on security, approval, and conventional wisdom might not be necessary. My independence threatened their justifications for their own limitations. I also recognized that much of the pressure to return came from genuine love and concern, which made it even more difficult to resist. People who cared about me couldn't understand why I would choose difficulty over comfort, uncertainty over security, isolation over community. Their inability to comprehend my choices sometimes felt like a deeper loneliness than any I experienced. In actual solitude, the key to maintaining my path despite this pressure was remembering that other people's inability to understand my choices didn't make those choices wrong. Their discomfort with my independence didn't obligate me to sacrifice my authenticity for their peace of mind. Their fear of my path didn't mean I should abandon it for their comfort. I learned to receive these appeals with compassion, but without compromise. I could acknowledge others' concerns without being controlled by them. I could appreciate their care without surrendering my autonomy. I could remain connected to people who loved me without allowing their limitations to become my limitations. The letters eventually stopped coming, but the principle they taught me remained. The world will always try to pull you back toward conformity, safety, and dependence. Your strength lies not in avoiding this pressure, but in maintaining your course despite it. The sword I forged with my own hands, during 3 months of complete isolation in the mountains, represents something that few people ever achieve: mastery developed without compromise, distraction, or the need to accommodate others' limitations or expectations. Every fold in the steel, every curve of the blade, every detail of the handle was shaped by my own vision and executed according to my own standards. When you pursue mastery in solitude, something remarkable happens that is impossible to achieve in group settings. Your development becomes pure, focused entirely on the relationship between you and the skill itself. There's no pressure to progress at others' pace, no need to explain your methods, no temptation to show off partially developed abilities, and no interference from well-meaning advisors who might steer you away from your instinctive approach. I spent years perfecting techniques that no one else ever saw. I developed refinements that served no purpose except my own satisfaction with excellence. I pursued levels of precision that went far beyond what any opponent would ever require, simply because the work itself demanded nothing less than perfection. This kind of deep mastery is impossible when you're performing for others or adapting to group dynamics. In collaborative learning, you inevitably compromise toward the middle ground, moving slower than you could alone to accommodate others, or faster than optimal because of external pressure. You spend energy managing relationships and politics that could be devoted entirely to skill development. The masterwork sword took 3 months to complete, not because the physical work required that long, but because I refused to accept anything less than perfection. Each day, I would examine what I had accomplished and often undo hours of work because it didn't meet my internal standards. Without anyone to impress or deadlines to meet, I could pursue quality over speed, depth over superficial completion. This process taught me the difference between performing skills and truly possessing them. When you learn in public, you often develop the ability to demonstrate techniques rather than master them. You become competent at showing others what you know, but you may never develop the deep understanding that comes from private exploration and refinement. Solitary mastery also allows for the kind of creative breakthrough that emerges only in the absence of external judgment. Some of my most innovative techniques developed during long hours of private practice, when I felt free to experiment with approaches that would have seemed foolish or wrong to observers. Without the pressure to conform to established methods, I could follow intuitive insights that led to genuine advancement. The sword became a physical representation of what becomes possible when you pursue excellence without compromise. Every element reflected my own aesthetic sense, my own understanding of function, my own vision of what a perfect weapon should be. It was uniquely mine in a way that mass-produced items or even custom work created for others could never be. Years later, when other swordsmiths examined this weapon, they could see immediately that it had been created by someone working at the highest levels of both technical skill and artistic vision. But what they couldn't see was that its true perfection came not from talent alone, but from the freedom to pursue mastery without any external constraints or compromises. The power of solitary mastery extends far beyond sword-making or martial arts. Any skill, any craft, any area of knowledge can be developed to extraordinary levels when pursued with the focus and freedom that only solitude provides. The practice records I kept of my few carefully chosen students reveal something that many people find paradoxical. The strongest teachers are often those who maintain their independence even while sharing their knowledge. The pages document not just their progress, but my own learning about how to guide others, without losing the solitary strength that made my guidance valuable in the first place. I accepted students rarely and only under specific conditions. They had to demonstrate not just talent, but the capacity for independent thinking and self-reliance. I had no interest in creating dependents who would follow my methods blindly, or in building a school that would require my constant presence to function. My goal was to share principles that would make my students stronger individually, not to create a group that would diminish my own autonomy. The teaching relationship I developed was unlike the traditional master-student dynamic. Instead of demanding loyalty or creating dependency, I insisted that my students question everything I taught them, test my methods against their own experience, and ultimately develop their own approach to the warrior's path. I wanted to accelerate their journey towards self-reliance, not slow it down with excessive guidance. This approach required tremendous discipline on my part. The temptation to bask in students' admiration, to enjoy the role of wise master, to build an organization around my teachings was constant. But I had learned that the moment you begin to need followers, you stop being worthy of following. The moment your identity becomes tied to others' dependence on you, you lose the independence that made your knowledge valuable. I taught by example more than instruction. Students observed my daily practice, my decision-making process, my way of approaching challenges. They learned as much from watching how I maintained my solitary disciplines while in their presence as they did from any formal lessons. They saw that strength comes from internal consistency, not external validation. The records show that my most successful students were those who eventually disagreed with me, who took what served them and discarded what didn't, who developed innovations that surpassed my own methods. These students understood that the highest honor they could give a teacher was to become independent of that teacher's guidance. I learned to share wisdom without needing appreciation for sharing it. I could offer guidance without becoming invested in whether it was followed. I could watch students make mistakes without rushing to prevent those mistakes, recognizing that their own failures would teach them more than my warnings ever could. The balance was delicate, remaining available as a resource while never becoming a crutch, offering insights without creating dependence, challenging students without controlling them. This required me to stay centered in my own path while temporarily opening that path to others. Teaching while walking alone meant that my students learned not just sword techniques or strategy, but something far more valuable. They learned what it looks like to be completely self-possessed, to need nothing from others while still being capable of generous service. They learned that true strength enables you to lift others up without being diminished by the effort. The manuscript of my Book of 5 Rings, written in complete solitude during my final years in the mountains, represents something that only becomes possible through a lifetime of walking alone. The distillation of authentic wisdom gained through direct experience rather than borrowed knowledge. Every principle recorded in those pages emerged from personal struggle. Every insight was tested in the crucible of solitary practice. Every teaching was earned through years of independent exploration. Legacy is not about being remembered, it's about creating something of lasting value that transcends your individual existence. When you walk the solitary path with dedication and integrity, you inevitably develop insights and capabilities that can benefit others long after you're gone. But this legacy is fundamentally different from what people create when they're constantly seeking approval or building their reputation for its own sake. The solitary path creates legacy through depth rather than breadth, through quality rather than quantity, through authentic contribution rather than mere visibility. Because I had spent decades developing my understanding without compromise or distraction, what I eventually shared carried a weight and clarity that could only come from genuine mastery. I wrote the 5 rings, not to establish my reputation or to attract followers, but because I had learned things through solitary practice that seemed worth preserving. The writing process itself was an extension of my solitary journey, months alone in a cave, with no audience to impress and no deadline to meet, simply trying to capture the essence of what I had discovered about strategy, timing, and the development of human potential. The paradox of solitary achievement is that it often creates the most lasting impact on others when you pursue excellence for its own sake rather than for recognition. When you develop your capabilities without compromise or shortcuts, when you follow your authentic path regardless of others' opinions, you inevitably create something unique and valuable. History shows us that the most enduring contributions to human knowledge and capability often come from individuals who are willing to work in isolation, to develop their understanding without external validation, to pursue truth rather than popularity. These solitary achievers leave behind innovations, insights, and examples that inspire others for generations. But the legacy of the solitary path extends beyond any specific accomplishment or written work. More importantly, it demonstrates to others that independence is possible, that you don't have to surrender your authenticity to succeed, that walking alone can lead to achievements that following the crowd never could. Every person who chooses the difficult path of self-reliance, who develops their own capabilities rather than depending on others, who pursues their authentic vision despite pressure to conform, creates a legacy simply by living that way. They prove to everyone around them that there are alternatives to dependence, mediocrity, and compromise. The manuscript became my gift to the future. But the real legacy was the example of what becomes possible when you have the courage to walk your own path completely. Years of solitary development had given me something worth sharing, and the discipline of independence had taught me how to share it without needing anything in return. I leave you with a blank scroll, empty of words but full of potential. This represents the story you have yet to write, the path you have yet to walk, the person you have yet to become when you finally find the courage to step away from the crowd and discover who you really are. The journey I have described is not easy. It requires you to give up the comfort of others' approval, the security of following established paths, and the convenience of having someone else make your difficult decisions. It demands that you face your fears without reassurance, develop your capabilities without shortcuts, and pursue your vision without guarantee of success. But the alternative, living your entire life according to others' expectations, seeking permission for your own dreams, depending on external validation for your sense of worth, is not really living at all. It's existing in a comfortable prison where you never discover your true potential, because you never take the risks necessary to develop it. Start small, but start immediately. Begin by making one decision today based entirely on your own judgment, without consulting anyone else or seeking approval. Choose something that matters to you, but doesn't require others' cooperation. Feel what it's like to act from your own center rather than reacting to external pressure. Gradually build your capacity for independence. Spend time alone without distraction, learning to be comfortable in your own company. Practice saying no to things that don't align with your authentic path, even when saying yes would be easier or more popular. Develop skills and knowledge that belong entirely to you, that no one can take away or diminish. Most importantly, learn to trust yourself, your instincts, your judgment, your vision of what's possible. These are more reliable than the collective wisdom of people who have never walked your specific path. You have everything you need within you to create an extraordinary life, but you'll never discover it while you're constantly looking to others for direction. The blank scroll awaits your story. Will it be the tale of someone who settled for safety and conformity, who spent their life seeking others' approval and following predetermined paths? Or will it record the journey of someone who had the courage to walk alone, to develop their unique gifts, to contribute something authentic and valuable to the world? The choice is yours alone to make. The path is yours alone to walk. The destination is yours alone to define. I have shown you what becomes possible when you embrace the solitary path with complete commitment. Now it's your turn to discover what becomes possible when you stop waiting for permission and start walking toward the person you were meant to become. Your journey begins with a single step away from the crowd and toward yourself.